Bruce, why don't you start by telling a little bit about your background and how you've come to be so involved with improvisational storytelling.
So I have taught for many years at the university. I teach biology. I'm about to retire very soon in the next few months, but I've taught at the university for many years, and I guess I used a very kind of improvisational style of my teaching. I made a number of jokes that I hadn't planned in the class and things like that. And so I went through a very difficult portion of my life and was looking for things to do to get my mind off of the problems that I was having. And one of the things that was happening in my town was storytelling. And one of the other things was happening was a class in improv. And I started doing both of them, doing both of them. My background in teaching really really prepared me or pre-prepared me for those kinds of things, because in a way I had been telling stories in my class, although not the kind of stories you would normally think of as stories, but they were stories, scientific stories, stories about true facts of science. And so I could fall into the storytelling pretty easily, and the improv took a little longer, but I got better and better at that over several years, and just started to put them together at one point. So I got in improv. There's many different types of improv, and I became more and more interested in a theatrical form of improv that is very storytelling based. And so it's kind of natural for me with that interest to also want to do stories that were improvisational stories. Catherine and I then took a workshop together from 3 storytellers. And since Catherine hasn't said anything yet, maybe I'll let her say a little bit about her background, and she can pick it up about this workshop that we did.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm in North Carolina in the United States. So my background was in theater before I met Bruce, and then my life took a turn, and theater was certainly, even though it was my work for a long time, it also was a good healing part of my life. And for a while I have been involved. I'm a counselor now. I'm a social worker, but I had lost the artistic part of myself that was so good for me, and I had started going to some storytelling groups, because that flows, that is a different art form, but it felt really comfortable and challenging and different than telling someone else's stories on a stage. And so I went to a storytelling workshop where I met Bruce, and he told an improv story, which, even though some of my background had been improv, I'd never even heard of improv storytelling. I didn't even know that was a thing. I was shocked that somebody would try to tell an improv story off a prompt. And I was very interested. And so we have been meeting for months now, I think over Zoom, like once a week, to work on storytelling. And I'm learning a lot, and I'm glad to collaborate. He's going to teach most of this. The teaching part is not mine, but I will pipe in from time to time. I am glad to be here. I think we're going to tell an improv story before we start, and he teaches the rest of the workshop.
So Catherine and I are still in process on this. I don't say we would be expert improv storytellers. I don't know if there's any really expert improv storytellers out there. I certainly haven't run into them if there are. I've heard some rumors about some. But they're using forms. They're doing part improv and part very formulaic kind of improv, kind of storytelling. Catherine and I do very free-form storytelling. We will encourage you along some of those lines, but we'll also use some forms tonight to get you telling improv stories. So Catherine and I will start and try to see if we can do it tonight in front of an audience, a 5-minute improv story, and then.
Sure.
I'm sorry, yes?
Yes, short.
Short, yes. And we've been working on getting our stories down short. When we started last summer over Zoom, meeting once a week, we were telling 15-minute, 20-minute stories, and we have been working very hard to get those down to 5 minutes, and sometimes we succeed. I'll tell you more about where people have trouble in stories and why 5-minute stories are harder to tell than longer stories. But so we'll try to tell a story, and then we'll talk a little bit more about why we're doing this and how some things that might be helpful in helping you become improv storytellers. And then we're going to have you tell a bunch of improv stories, not necessarily in front of the whole group, but we'll put you in breakout rooms with certain kinds of prompts that will help you do these and kind of approach it in a step-by-step fashion, so that by the end of an hour and a half, you've told a couple improvisational stories with either alone, which is how we'll start with very short little stories told alone, and then with very strong prompts, and then by the end with doing some group improv stories. So maybe what I should say before Catherine and I do it is just how this works. We're just going to alternate. We'll ask for a prompt from one of you, and you'll tell us some word or a name or something. We often just start with a person's name and make everything up from that name. And then we alternate. And so we just stop at some point and let the other person take over. Now, we do try to give the other person all the good lines. So if there's some event that's about to happen, you might see one of us say, and then the dragon, and now it's the other person's turn to decide what the dragon did. So that is a very basic principle of improvisation, is to make your partner look good. Because if your partner looks good, you're going to look good too. So.
And it's just kinder to do that.
And we're into kindness. We are definitely into kindness, especially in these times. So, Catherine, do you have a certain kind of prompt you would like?
I don't know. Does somebody have either like a name or a place? I really like feeling prompts too, like angry or joy, but any of that, a name, a place, a feeling? What is that, June? Is that a frog?
It's a
frog
that you use as a it's a rhythm instrument that you have a little.
Oh, over his back. Yes.
Yep. Exactly.
It's a gear.
Okay. So a
are you taking a
frog
frog or Grizak?
or an instrument? Let's go with a frog.
Okay, frog. And could we have
Okay,
other people? Catherine and I will have our cameras on. If everyone else would turn off their cameras.
Oh yeah, because that's a lot of faces. It's so weird on Zoom.
We'll invite you back in a minute.
Yeah. Is that just me and you? Okay. All right. Now what do we do?
Now we start. What do you mean? What do we do?
Oh,
We've
okay,
done
a
this
frog.
before.
Yeah, I've done this before. This isn't my first time. Okay, a frog. You want me to start? I'll start. It had rained the entire night before.
Ron had spent the whole night outside.
And he was dripping wet and exhausted. He hadn't gotten a wink of sleep.
Even though he was feeling like a frog for all of the wet that he had to live through, he still dreamed of dryness. He still dreamed of the desert.
He didn't even really understand how he had gotten to this boggy place. He had been voyaging for quite some time and was confused about how he even found a place so wet.
He figured it must have been that last turn that he took up at the gas station. He'd run the RV all night and he was pretty tired.
But there was this hole in the top of the RV, and that's where the water came in. And no matter where he moved, he always seemed to get wet again.
So when he parked and decided to take a nap for the night, sleeping in the front seat,
He thought that maybe that would be his one respite from the wet. And finally, he fell asleep. And the next morning,
He looked up at the top and he saw how the top of the RV had slanted down in, and so that all the water which had accumulated there at night had washed down over him. And now
He thought maybe he could prop up part of the roof of the RV, but as he looked up at his hand, it looked strangely different than he had ever seen his hand look before.
he looked down at his arm, and he looked down at his belly, and he looked down at his feet, and they looked different too.
He thought that maybe something had happened in the night, or maybe he was stuck in some sort of bad dream, and he opened his mouth to say something to himself, and what came out was,
"Rah!" He was shocked.
he couldn't believe that the sound seemed to match what his body was reflecting, and he tried again. Was all he could seem to say. Well, he jumped into the driver's seat.
And he opened the door and he plopped outside. Plopped was right because
he had completely turned into the form of a frog. He could see it in the reflecting pool that was beside the RV. Everything around him was mucky and wet. Oh, what he wanted was dry. How did this happen? So
he hopped around to the back of the RV and he tried to get the back doors open, but
his hands wouldn't work, and they weren't even really hands anymore. They were little webbed feet, and he wanted to move somehow into the back of the RV, but he was unable. He also seemed to be shrinking over time, which was worrisome as well.
pretty soon his efforts to hop up and grab that door handle weren't even reaching him to the back bumper. He couldn't even seem to hop up onto the back bumper. And so he turned around.
And he looked out at this mucky wet and the reflecting pool, and a thought came to him that his Graham used to say, a thought that soothed him in times of trouble when he wanted to be something that he wasn't, which was what this whole trek to the desert was out of in the first place. She used to say, "You're always right where you're meant to be." And so he plopped down in the wet and thought about it.
And he slowly made his way down into that big, wet pond, which with each hop was looking more and more attractive. Until finally,
the idea of the desert had almost faded away. And he took one huge leap and landed
right in the water and began swimming. And nothing had ever felt quite as good.
See,
Okay, you can all come back.
everybody come back.
Just under 6 minutes.
Hey, not bad. Faster. That's good. So you never know exactly what you're going to get. That's part of the improv fun. So thank you for the frog. I think it was June. Thank you, June, for the frog. That's how that worked. And Bruce is going to talk about some forms we've used, especially they've been helpful for me as I've learned more about the story arc and form I knew from my theater work, but the storytelling was a learning curve for me. So he's going to talk some about that too.
Well, and before I do that, I want to thank Catherine for not making me come up with that saying by the grandmother, because I had nothing. I had nothing with that. So
I thought
thank
about
you very
that.
much.
I was like, I should probably say whatever Graham
I think
is gonna
so.
say.
That was a very good
Yeah, I
idea.
did. Okay. You're welcome.
Okay, so why do we do this? Besides, you know some of the history about we do it, but why am I interested in this? And I'll let Catherine also say why she's interested. In a way, she has, and I guess we might be similar on this. I really do this to get out of my analytical brain. I mean, to get into my right brain. And improv storytelling both make you do that even more than storytelling does, because you have to be as much as you can in the moment. So I'm a scientist. I spend a lot of time taking things apart, doing critiques of stuff, and this is very different. It's a very different way of being. And so I'm interested in that, and I'm also interested very much in what I would call group flow. So really great improv, you get into a state where it's hard to describe, and I'm not sure I've really been in a group that's done it extremely well yet, but I know it happens. So I know it happens in dancing. I know that I never was a great dancer, but I used to do a good deal of swing dancing and things, and you just get into a state where things flow with it. Or skiing, I'm skiing now. You can get into a flow state in skiing. All of these things that are more right-brained, and you can do that with groups also. So I know that also from group work. Counsel or dialogue or very different kinds of circle works where things happen in circles where you hear someone else say your idea. And so you've been sitting there thinking about something and then someone else comes up with it. So that's kind of what we're looking for in, ultimately, that's what I'm looking for in group improv storytelling, is finding that state where we're really so much on that we can almost complete each other's ideas. I don't think, and I've reached it yet on these things. I say we're a work in progress, but that's why I want to do it, because I'm really interested in that, and I'm interested in that great feeling of connection. Catherine, do you want to add anything?
I think that for me is why to engage in art and any, or, meditation, anything that takes me into a place where I'm able to get more centered and grounded within myself. I know the topic of the whole conference is about storytelling and healing. And I really do feel strongly that that is what art and creativity allows for us, allows for me, is to get more centered in my own self, and therefore necessarily be more connected to others. And, I can get so thinky that it takes me out of that. And storytelling is a way to get reconnected to that piece.
Yeah, that's great. So you can do these group storytelling with as few as 2 people and maybe as many as 7 or 8. I've done it with about 7 before in groups. It's a little harder in some ways in those groups because you have to get everybody on the same page. But it goes fine. If you have bigger groups than that, and I have done it with bigger groups, there are forms that come out of circle work that you can use to do those. And I'm not sure I should go into those here, but I saw some people nodding when I said things about counsel or dialogue or circle work. And you might know forms from those works that allow small groups to work together within the context of a larger group. And you can do this improv storytelling with those forms also. If later on in the workshop people want to ask questions, I can talk about what one of those forms would be like. It's just a way of getting a certain number of people working together within the larger group, but yet keeping the involvement of the whole group at the same time. So we've talked a little bit about, well, maybe I should stop and ask for questions here before we start doing kind of workshop things. And so don't forget to unmute.
I see Gail.
If you have a question, you can press the space bar on your keyboard, and that'll unmute you temporarily.
Catherine and Bruce, I'm a theater person too, and I really enjoyed the way you listened to each other and you paused and you just knew if the other person wasn't quite ready. And you know, I mean, it was so imperceptible, but I loved the way you worked and listened and watched each other for the cues.
Thank you, Gail.
And thank you.
It's really lovely. I don't usually ever have feedback from us doing this. We've been on Zoom for so long, so it's nice to have other people in the room.
And thank you so much for that comment too, because that's one thing we want to tell you when, so a core principle of improv and of improv storytelling is listening, and perhaps the most key principle. So you want to listen to what the other person is saying. And I want to give a special example of that. Something that Catherine did is I said at the beginning that he was dreaming of the desert, even though he was all wet. And Catherine brought that back around and brought that back in. And so that's really helpful. And I think that you probably would have felt cheated a little bit of the story if we had dropped that desert part of there out of it. You would have felt like there was, a loose end. So listening is very important. I think June had a question.
Yeah. Are you thinking about what you're going to say, or are you completely just focused on your partner, and when she stops, then you start thinking?
I have something to say.
Take it first.
Do you want to? I just want to say this bit about Bruce and I lately have been talking about shortening the pieces that we hand off back and forth. There had been a time where we would say 3 or 4 sentences, and it was like we were telling this huge chunk of the story, 5 sentences, telling this huge chunk of the story, like a whole pit, right? Well, then you're getting in charge of the story, right? Like you're making the story happen. When it's these tiny little pieces, you give up some of your control over the story. And so you have to listen, because you just tell half a sentence. Well, that other person could think a completely different thing than you think. And you have to be ready to pick it up. So I found when we were telling bigger chunks, I was planning, and when we tell little bits, I'm just with them. And it makes it much easier just to be in the story. I think that's a great question. What do you think, Bruce?
So something I wanted to talk about was images in this. And so I think one of the very important things for me is images in the story. So when I told that improv story, it was one of the first ones that I did at the workshop with Catherine. I went to the storytelling workshop with the intent of not bringing stories and only doing improv stories. And it was my first real exploration of this. So I just kind of stood on the cliff there. And the story that I finally told by the end of the workshop was not bad. It was reasonably well. Catherine spoke to me afterwards, so it must have been good. And I did it because I saw the images. So they gave me a really good prompt that worked very well for me, which was the prompt was a night. And then I just saw a picture of a night. I saw what happened next. I saw the pictures, and then I just described the pictures. And so in that sense, it could be very easy. So that's a very right brain kind of thing. And that's, again, why I'm interested in this. So I want to encourage you when you're working on telling stories is pay attention to what the pictures that appear in your mind and just trust them. Trust that there's a story there and kind of describe the picture. And when you get into it a little bit, another picture will appear and just do that one and then just do that one. And the story goes on.
I think of it like a ping pong match, but you want the other person to hit the ball back, right? You want to hit it so they can hit it back to you, right? And there's this faith that Bruce is talking about that's involved, that they're going to, that they want to, you want to be in this conversation, you want to commune with this other person telling the story. So there has to be this kind of brave generosity that occurs so that you don't feel like they're going to let you fall on your face in the story.
Denise has a hand up.
Yeah, I'm listening to everything that's going on. And when you were doing the storytelling together, I'm thinking in my head, oh, you can do this for tandem telling. You could do this like a round robin. But beyond that, that listening aspect of it that you did bring up, it's such a great tool to practice listening to someone else. And apart from that, personally, I don't like group work where it's, like this group does something and they're responsible, because generally one person will take the lead and everybody else will sit back. Or that cooperative stuff. I like collaborative activities. And what you're talking about here, focuses on a collaboration so that every person who is involved has got a stake in it, and they're responsible for a piece of it to make it happen. It's not where it's an unevenly divided pie. It's where everyone can add to what that product is. I just think that this has so many different applications, and it's wonderful to hear you and to hear the feedback from everyone through this. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
No, thank you very much. Denise, I would just encourage you to look into a group work called Counsel. That's probably the easiest part, because there's a wonderful book called The Way of Counsel by Zimmerman and Coyle. It's about group work that is exactly like you say, where everyone has responsibility for what's happening in the circle. And yeah, so the fact that I had that background in counsel training, et cetera, influences how I think about group storytelling also.
What is it called? It's called The Counsel?
I'll put it, while Sonia is answering her.
Yeah, please.
Yep, I'll put the name in the chat here. And Sonia.
And then Sonia has her.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say a quick thing that at our story firm, so we do story coaching with the business houses. In fact, what you just showed us in 6 minutes, or in precisely 6.5 minutes, is something what is taught at StoryNAC is, before teaching the art of storytelling, we teach them the art of story listening and story gathering. And I think this was a fabulous demonstration to make our audience understand, or to make our students understand, that how story listening and story gathering is far, far more important than storytelling. And in fact, we call it like the basic pillars of storytelling. So be a story listener and story gatherer before we want to become a storyteller. So thank you so much, Bruce and Catherine, for a wonderful start.
Sonia, I've never heard like that. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate that idea of being a story gatherer before. That's so cool. I don't know, maybe that's a thing. I'm kind of new, but like, that's a really good idea for me to think about. Like, I need to be, because I talk about gathering information with the people I work with as a counselor. We need more information. We always need more information. We never, we don't have the whole story. We need more. So for you to talk about it that way is really helpful to me. Thank you.
So,
Okay, well, let's go on. Since we've been talking about the flow state and getting into our right minds, I thought we could take maybe 1 or 2 minutes and just do a very, very short meditation. Now, I am not a meditation teacher, and there are probably meditation teachers in this room, and so please forgive me for this, but I wanted just to make sure that we had slowed down a little bit and spent time not thinking, or just at least a few breaths. And then we will start and do some exercises together where I'll put you in breakout rooms. And from then on, we'll be doing a bunch of breakout room exercises. So all I want people to do is to sit comfortably in any way that you want. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. Maybe take a deep breath or two. And I'm just going to ask that you pay attention to your breath. So to do that, if you have eye glasses on, you might want to take them off. If you have your mouth closed, you might want to let it fall open, just a small amount. And if you are embarrassed what you look like, you can turn off your camera. And you will breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Paying attention to the in-breath. And when you notice you're thinking, label what is happening thinking, and come back to your in-breath. Good. Thank you very much. I think next time I'll ask Shrivdaya to lead that because she has obviously done this before. So I'm going to now, in a minute, throw you into a breakout room. And in that breakout room, I want you to look in the chat. There's going to be this link, or I'm sending you the link right now, which you can click on. Everyone should open that page. I will show you what that will look like here by sharing my screen. So here is what that page looks like when you get it open. And there are 7 photographs there. You can go over and you can click on one of the photographs. You can all see my screen, I hope. I should check on that. So we can click on one of the photographs or double click on it and it will open. So these are just old photographs. They're something my mother had when she passed some years ago, and no one in the family knows what these are about. And they're all that way, of different kinds. Okay, so I want to put you into breakout rooms of 3 people each and choose a photograph. Please don't spend a lot of time worrying about which photograph is, just grab one and choose it. And then of the 3 people in the room, the first person tells a 1 or 2 minute story about the photograph. Now, what I mean by telling a story here is, you can just describe what's going on in the photograph. For instance, if you saw these 2 guys, so Peter and James were the best friends, and they were actors in a school play, etc. Just describe what you see in the photograph. Okay, so it doesn't have to get very elaborate story. Tell me about who these people are, what they're doing, etc. And then the second person does it, and the third, so go around a minute to a minute and a half. We're not going to give you a lot of time on these exercises.
Do we use the same photo?
Yes, you should. I think, why don't you use the same photo? That would make it easy. Just 3 different stories about the same photo. And then, again, just kind of pay attention to what picture appears in your mind when those things come up. So and then we'll come back here, and then we may go back into a room again. Catherine, anything to add?
No, I've just never seen those pictures, so I'm fascinated.
Bruce, a quick question here as a clarity. You said 1 picture and 3 different people tell the story, or
Yes.
is it 3 different people build the story? So, for example, I'm the first person, I say a few lines, and the second person will build up from there, or?
Would you rather do it that way? I was going to let you step into it closely, but I see that Gail really would like to do it that way.
You know why I'm suggesting that? I don't know. I thought it that way because then that is about building a story like a true improv. That,
Yeah.
On the same picture, 3 different people are working on the storyline. So somebody's doing the start part of it, then the second person does the middle part of it, and the third person does the end part of it. So at least have a short story around
Let's
it.
do it.
I think it's a great idea. I think Bruce was thinking about not going easy on you and let each person not do that yet. But yes, if you want to go ahead and do that, that's a great idea.
I didn't mean to make it difficult for everybody.
I think yes is the answer.
I think it probably made it easier.
No, that was not the intention of asking this question.
It's a good idea. I like it.
Okay, I am going to
How much time did you say?
about 5 minutes, because we want time to talk and we want time to do other exercises.
Okay.
Take me a second to get this set up.
And I think there's some people that have joined recently. So if it feels like you just need to do a two-person until they catch on, that's okay too.
There is something very strange about what is Oh, I know what's happening.
Is it something with the breakout rooms?
I think they did breakout rooms previously, and I am seeing the old breakout rooms here. And so I have to get rid of those in order to create new breakout rooms because people are pre-assigned to these rooms, and I was trying to figure out how that could have happened. Oh, yeah. So there's always little, tricks on Zoom, and here is one of those tricks that breakout rooms have been created in Eric's Zoom room before, and so it is not letting me add rooms in this way.
Mm.
Well, as long as we get some rooms, we can work
Yes,
it out.
it is just a lot harder to do this than I thought it was going to be. I'm working on it.
Bruce, I have a comment. Is that okay?
Yes,
You're doing
please.
that?
Yes, talk, please, while I'm working on this.
Talking is good.
First of all, I'm also from North Carolina, so glad to see you guys here, and thank you for this topic. And my kids, ironically, have been telling improv stories all week at a storytelling camp through Rhode Island Black storytellers, and so they're completely in that flow state that you were talking about, and they had some really nice teachers who gave them that little feeding, and then they just took off from there. And one of the ones that I wrote in the chat, which I felt was very helpful and might be for adults, is that that first there's the beginning and then the middle and the end. The beginning is really about introducing who and where and so the time and place, right? It's that those little details, like sometimes we, any storyteller can just forget. That's the meat that we really need to know at the beginning. And then he's like, well, what's the problem? So getting right into, okay, well, someone's drowning or blah, blah, blah. And then then the story explodes or takes off. And then the resolution is the ending point. So the middle is that curve of the story. And then and I think you mentioned this too about coming back. And the kids I was noticing in their stories, were naturally doing that. The story started with a mango, and it went way away, but then it came back to the mango at the end. Or there's some resolution that first thing that they started with was what also was part of the ending, if that makes sense. So yeah.
There's I think he's got it later on that there's this really helpful format. It's very similar to what you're talking about, of how you build the story. And so until it's something that's just happening naturally, I found it helpful, format, because of that, because of that, because of that, and then what happened. And so there's a way to once you do that enough times, it kind of just is in the, and kids are so good at bringing the story back around. I mean, I just think, as an adult, we get so much chatter and muck built on top of our natural instinct to just tell story, that we get all self-conscious about it. And that really, as kids, we just know how to tell a good story. How you doing, Bruce?
I'm ready. You're going to be in a room. I don't know where I'm going to be.
Oh, cool.
You can pop back
Awesome.
into the main room, Catherine, if you want to. I've got you in a room with 3 other people, so there's 4 there. And I'm not sure where I am because of this weird thing of Eric's having set up the rooms before. But I think I've got it set.
I'll just hang out. Okay.
So give
See you in
this a
5
try.
minutes. Sure.
The time that we figured it out, the time lapsed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Finished the whole activity.
But Srividya, we did finish the activity, but it was
Yes.
great of Srividya to put this on her background because, I could not see the link and image.
Ah.
But yes, so now everybody knows that we have worked on this picture.
Everybody can make a story out of this.
Yeah.
I had a little wagon like that when I was about that boy's age, but that is not me. Okay, let's try another one, and we'll do it again in breakout rooms again. But this time we will try to use a little bit of a structure, like Ian Marin was that who was saying that just before when I was trying to set up the breakout room. Someone was saying, I think it was Marin, that there should be some structure, or there could be some structure. And I will paste that in the chat, and I'm going to share it on my screen now. So here's what I've just shared in the chat. So we're going to ask you to tell a story about a knight and a dragon. And you can use these prompts to tell your story. So the first person says, once upon a time. And if you want to start, it's very simple. You could just say there was a knight and a dragon. Or you can say there was a knight and another person can bring in the dragon, or you got the idea, but you start with once upon a time. And then we set up what happens at the beginning of the story. And every day, so this is the normal life of that knight or the dragon or the two of them. Or every day the knight rode out on an adventure looking for dragons. And describe a little bit of what happens on that every day. And then something happens, the inciting incident happens, something goes wrong, until one day something happened that messed it all up. And the knight couldn't do that anymore. And because of that, something happened. That's another person. And the next person, because of that, something happened. And because of that, something happened. And you could do a couple more if you wanted to. I wouldn't go more than 5 because of that, but somewhere between 3 and 5, until finally there was some kind of a resolution. Something happened to resolve the situation. And ever since then, and that then rounds up the story. So the beginning is once upon a time and every day. That's our beginning of the story. The middle is, or the inciting incidents, the big transition is until one day. The middle of the story is because of that, because of that, because of that. And then the end of the story is until finally, ever since then, the 3 parts of our story. Okay,
Bruce,
so
can I
those
say
are
one
our
thing?
3 parts. Any questions before we go?
Can I say one thing? I was saying one thing to Ramya before I left that. This is making me think of that. I was saying that it helps after you practice with the same person for a while. And the other thing that helps is having like a format. I thought this was really helpful too. So that was the second part of what I was saying at the end of when we were all together. That's all. Thanks.
And so I need to give credit to the person who came up with this formulation. This is a formulation developed by the improviser and improvised coach, Ken Adams, who's out in Berkeley, California. And he's written a book, How to Improvise a Full-Length Play. And this little sequence here, which is classic story structure, is out of that book. And he elaborates on this then later on in the book. And so that's another thing I recommend if you're interested in improv and long-form theatrical improv, is Ken's book. I'll post that in the chat here in a little bit. But right now, any other questions about this? And we'll send you out again 5 minutes or so, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And
5 was short when I was
5
out
was
there.
short.
Maybe 7. Can you do 7 minutes?
I can.
Maybe. Yeah. Give it a couple more to get acclimated.
And please come back to the room if there's no one else in your room with you. Okay, if you finish a story very quickly, this is a very short form, just do another one. And I would suggest you do a knight and a dragon again, because there's a million stories about knights and dragons. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms now. 7 minutes. So here we are, we're back. And I had said before we ended that I would post something about Ken Adams' book. So I've posted a link to that on a publisher's website so you can see what that book is that I took that little exercise out of. So we don't have a lot of time left. I want to offer another thing here, and that is that if we would have 5 people who would like to sit here in a circle, a metaphorical circle between India and other parts of the world, and tell an improv story together, we can try that now before we open it up for discussion. We want a story about a wolf and a wizard. I'll turn off my video and you can start. And if I may stop in with a suggestion at some point, but I hope not. Is everyone clear on what you're doing? Short? Each person does a relatively short. What? No? I want a
No,
short,
yeah, I think we're good.
a short description from each person. Try to leave it open. Try not to take the great lines for yourself so the next person comes around and they get the great line.
Bruce, I have a query. Are we
Yep.
taking multiple rounds? So 1 to 6, once again 1 to 6, or is
Yes.
it one single round?
No, you can go multiple rounds. And then you have to, so that's the hard part. You have to find the place to stop.
Cool.
And we'll talk more about
So,
that. I'm throwing you in on this. So you're going to have to find the place to stop among you. Ready? Okay, all set.
Hope so.
All right, since he assigned me number 1, I'm going to use the format. Once upon a time, in a deep, dark forest, there lived a wolf. And closer to that forest was a village. And that village was known by a wizard.
The wizard was wicked. At least that's what the villagers said. Yes. Third, at least that's what the villagers said. Or at least villagers felt. She seemed really, really wicked. Into her home always. Next.
Oh, now that village came a prince or princess. I don't know who is elf. Who is the character in the story?
Wolf and the wizard.
Only 2 characters. Only 2 characters.
You can keep introducing the characters, but it started with wolf
Yeah.
and wizard.
Yeah, I think a princess came to that village, and the wizard was actually not a wizard. He was in disguise, and the princess was walking on the streets. There she was trapped in a hole on the ground. In the hole, there was a big snake, and she was not knowing how to escape from that snake. She was asking for help.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you because you've made all the mistakes that everyone makes. So we've got enough mistakes now to start over again. So remember, short pieces, we want short pieces. Be very careful about introducing new characters, because if you introduce a new character, you've got an idea of where it's gonna go, but no one else in this group has got an idea of where those characters are gonna go. And now, instead of keeping track of 2 characters, they've got to keep track of 4 characters or 5 characters, and they've got all these interactions, and you'll completely lose it within 3 people. The next person won't know what it is, and the story will just fall apart. So I'm really going to encourage you to stay with the 2 characters that can introduce it. Don't introduce any more, and try to do something between them. Make them interact in some kind of way. Okay, so very short places. Okay. Give your partner something to say, and don't introduce too many extra characters. We're back to a king and a simpleton, and we are going to start with number 4. Maren as the
Are
first
we not?
person.
Are we not? We're not doing the wolf and the wizard.
We're not,
Why
no,
don't we just stay at the wolf and the wizard since that's already where they are?
if you want
Yeah.
to, okay,
Yeah, let's just stay with the simple.
okay. Wolf and the Wizard, but number 4. Okay.
In the basement, inside the snake, which was a python as round as the world, was a king and a simpleton. But we don't know that because we
Wait,
are
we're
not
off on the wrong story. Wait, hang on. I'm so confused.
the right story. I am in
Starting
the story.
over. Starting
I'm
over.
in the right story here. We do not know that because we are not the wizard. Ah, ah. Everyone thought that the wizard was wild and evil, but he, correct? He knew things that others did not. And he knew things about that wolf.
That wolf would howl in that forest all through the night because what the wizard knew, and only what the wizard knew, was that he had transformed that wolf into a wolf. Before that, the wolf had not been a wolf at all. The wolf had been
The princess's sister, who was another day roaming in the village streets. And that day, once again, she fell down into the little pit that was dug by the wizard. And he caught hold of her, and immediately transformed the wolf, because the wolf's blood can help make him beautiful potions, which can.
And this way, Wizard had been always doing this to all the beautiful girls in the village. And until one day it came to the notice of another villager. And then finally,
to take or steal that potion, that villager got into the wizard's home. And what he saw was, yes, next.
speaker third, Mr. Pandya.
Yeah. Now, as Sonia told, that wizard was playing with all type of girls in the village, and it was noticed by the villager. And what Srividya told, I could not understand. What Srividya added?
Yes, okay, I'll react. And then that one, finally, the other villager came to know about the potion. He wanted to steal it. So he went inside the wizard's home. And when he entered, he saw.
Oh, so there is, now I have to find riddle, how to solve it. Okay. So the villager went into the wizard, and the wizard was simply sitting and watching the fireplace. The fireplace, suddenly he walked into the fireplace. How can anyone can walk into the fireplace? So the villager was taken aback. So villagers went near the fireplace. Actually, the fireplace was not hot, which was expected to be, because after all, it is a fireplace. Then the villager chose to walk into it. When he walked into it, there was an old man sitting inside the fireplace. The old man was removing his overcoat, and inside the overcoat there was.
Died. Inside the fire, inside the wizard, inside each of us is an imaginary wild animal that roams the dark forest and eats up our sisters. What does that have to do with the story in front of us? And where are all the missing beautiful women and princesses?
We
They
maybe have
say-
to end with a question because we have
Oh,
only
can
5
we
minutes
done?
left. And I wanted at least
Okay.
5 minutes. I wish we had more for some reaction if other people want to turn their videos back on. And let's thank the people who were brave enough to come out and try a improv storytelling in front of everyone. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So any last questions or comments before we end? I wish there was more time, but there isn't, so I don't want to run too much over.
Just one thing in terms of setting it up before. I think everybody, you know, through experiencing this particular story, it got a little convoluted.
It went just exactly like these always go the first time you ask people to do it. They introduce extra characters. They don't listen very well to what's been said before. They try to tell their own story because they got their story in their mind and they haven't gotten yet together on this thing. And they can have a very good time on it, especially young people might have a very, very good time doing all of those things. But it's not yet what we would call a coherent story on this. And so I personally believe there's no way to learn storytelling except to tell stories, or to tell improv stories except by telling stories. And so if we had a little more time, we would do it again and again, and we would, by the end, we would get better at it. So the frustrating thing is here that we have to stop where we're at this very beginning stage where we haven't done it. We don't feel a sense of completion on it or a sense of accomplishment. So the other third, the third place where everyone makes a mistake, and you don't think that people are going to make a mistake here, but every group I've ever done this can't end the story. So, and Catherine and I have the same problem. It is very difficult to end these stories. And that takes a real discipline and learning on your part, and why those prompts are good, because if you're going through the prompts, it forces you to say, now I have to say, and finally. And it's that and finally part that is the hardest part of improv storytelling, because you want to just keep it going on. But you don't know how, Catherine can tell us sometime the psychology of it, but there's a deep psychology there, I think, that doesn't let us end.
Yeah, I think that
I
such a
don't
great
sound negative.
suggestion
do
is
thank
that I think that's such a great suggestion of, really sticking with the idea that we're going to stick to the format in the beginning. And I think that maybe just need to say, we'll say it a little bit more overtly the next time, because it really is hard. The whole ending of the story, I find, is the hardest thing too. Denise, I see you really want to say something.
Yeah, I felt that things got out of control, and I think that what you're saying and what Bruce is saying, it is right on. I think that what I feel that I discovered through this activity, which I am going to try with other people, is that there needs to be a stress there about how important it is not to derail the story from what it is that you're starting with, because I think that having that consideration for the person who's coming after you to have something to work with, sticking to some kind of script, not that it's laid out already, but that's followable. I think that that's a big component of it. I think it is. It's not looking at it as, oh, I want to do this because this is going to be great, but what it is that I'm passing to someone else that is usable for them. So really, it's kind of a giving and selfless act of passing the ball.
It is, and it's not something that comes natural to us in these days, I think, maybe in any day. And so, although that's great what you're saying, Denise, and give everyone the structure and stuff, just don't expect them to do it well the first time. You just be prepared that they're not going to do it well the first time, and that's going to take repetitions and things.
Bruce, you're so right. If the expectation in something that's a workshop or practice is perfection, we're kind of off on the wrong foot. So that's all a really good point.
Okay, I want to thank Bruce and Catherine very, very, very much. I got my cat nap for part of it.
Very good. We're
Thank-
very happy, Eric. Thank you so much for all the work you've done in
But it-
organizing.